Hello everyone, I Sonal Dubey. Welcome you all with a very exciting topic of evolution of business and commercial geography, and that is Great Depression. So, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss about the Great Depression, what were the causes behind it, and what was the impacts of Great Depression on international business. I hope you have heard this word earlier, the Great Depression. The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in US history. It began in 1929 and did not abate until the end of the 1930s. And the stock market crash of October 1929 signaled the beginning of the Great Depression. By 1933, unemployment was at 25% and more than 5,000 banks had gone out of business. So, you can understand how strong it was. The economists and historians often cite the Great Depression as the most critical economic event of the 20th century. And it lasted for 10 years, from 1929 to 39, and was the worst economic depression in the history of the United States. So now let's discuss what was the causes behind the Great Depression. First, before understanding all these causes, I'll explain you a very simple cause behind the Great Depression, and that was nothing but overproduction done in America. After World War I, what happened that the American employees start doing overproduction. The farmers, the technological things, they all were producing more than the demand. So supply was more and demand was less. The farmers had taken the loans from the banks and then they produce a lot. And what happened, as the supply was high and the demand was not up to the mark, so they were not able to sell it out. So because of that, they are not able to get all the profits which they were expecting, and because of that they were not able to repay the loans. And when farmers were not repaid the loans to the bank has no amount with them to do transactions with their normal customer, and that was the reason why all the bank crashes during this time. Okay. And why it is called Great Depression? It is when the recession lasted for a long time, it converted into depression. Okay, so these were the main causes. I have explained you the simple cause behind the Great Depression, but because of that, what happens are the causes behind the Great Depression. So first one is stock market crash. The stock market soared throughout most of the 1920s, and the more it grew, the more people were eager to pour money into it. Many people bought on margin, which meant they paid only part of the stock's worth when they bought it and the rest when they sold it. That worked fine as long as the stock prices kept going up. But when the market was crashed in the late October, they were forced to pay up the stocks that were worth far less than what they have paid for them. Okay. Second cause was bank failure. Many small banks, particularly in rural areas, I have told you that farmers have taken loans, have overextended credit to farmers who for the most part had not shared in the prosperity of the 1920s and often could not repay the loans. Big bank, meanwhile, had foolishly made huge loans to foreign countries, so the foreign country could repay their earlier debts from World War I. Because I have told you in my earlier videos that the US was the only country which has given credit to all the countries which have a major shattered economy after World War I. So they have paid many loans to the other countries and not got that them back on time. So it was also a reason behind the Great Depression. Okay. reduction in purchasing across the board. With the stock market crash and the fears of further economic woes, individuals from all classes stopped purchasing items. This then led to a reduction in the number of items produced and thus a reduction in the workforce. As people lost their jobs, they were unable to keep with paying for a item they had bought through installment plans, and their items were repressed. So reduction in purchasing is also the reason behind the Great Depression. Too many poor people. It was also, or poverty was also a cause behind the Great Depression. While the overall economy has soared in 1920s, most of the wealth was enjoyed by relatively few Americans. In 1929, 40% of the families in the country were still living at a or below the poverty level. That made them too poor to buy goods and services and too poor to pay their debts. Okay. Now, farm failure. Many American farmers were already having a hard time before the depression, mostly because they were producing too much and farm products prices were too low. That's what I have told you earlier, that demand was less and supply was high. And environmental disasters also happened because of overproduction. The production of vast crops during World War I and the decade that followed resulted in overplowing of much of the Americans' farmland, and this resulted into stripped grasslands. Okay, and worse droughts also were there at that time. Now, government inaction. The government didn't try enough to jumpstart the economy by pushing the Federal Reserve System, and this could have been done by lending money to banks at low interest rate and pumping money into the economy through federal purchases. So this was government inaction was also the reason behind the Great Depression. Okay. Now, the impacts of Great Depression. The Great Depression has devastating effects in countries of rich and poor. Personal income, tax revenue, profit and prices dropped, while international trade plunged by more than 50%. Unemployment in the US rose to 25%, and in some countries rose as high as 33%. Farming and rural areas suffered as crop prices fell by approximately 60%. In many countries, the negative effects of the Great Depression lasted until after the end of World War II. So basically, during the Great Depression, farmers struggled a lot. Rising price result in declining of consumer. The gap between the rich and poor widened, and banks were failed. And GNP, gross national product, decreased. There was unemployment and hardship and homelessness. So major problems were there in US at that time. Its economy was shrink. Okay, there was very negative social impact, unemployment, banks failed, stock market crash, deflation. Everything happened during the Great Depression. So US has seen a hard time during that 10 years. Okay. So this is the overall impact of Great Depression on different countries. I have told you about the US. Because US is connected with all the other countries. Okay. It do businesses with all the countries. And so if US economy is shrinking, it will impact all the other countries also. So there was an effect on Britain. Its industrial product demand was decreased, unemployment was there. In Latin America also there was fall in exports, and in damaged economy, it has a damaged economy. Japan was doing good. It has not major impact of Great Depression. Its textile industry was rapidly growing. Germany sales dropped. Its many factories were closed and unemployment was there. Australia has also have a negative impact on of Great Depression. There was unemployment, deflation, poverty, export was declined. So basically all the countries have seen a very negative impact of Great Depression, which was happened in US after World War I. So I hope this topic is clear to you now. And you can link it with both the wars. Has started after World War I, and it ends with the when World War II started. Okay, so this is done for the day. Thank you, and meet you soon.